Hey Nick, how are you?
I'm well, man. How are you?
I'm doing well. I appreciate you coming to counseling today. Before we get started, I need to get into some limitations of confidentiality. Generally speaking, anything that is said in this room stays between us, but there are a few limitations to that, and they are as follows. Any current or past child abuse or elder abuse is something that I will have to make a report of. Any suicidal or homicidal statements from you with an identified victim is something I would have to report. In some instances, contagious or life-threatening diseases is something that I would have to make a report of. And lastly, end-of-life decisions, and if the courts were to demand the clinical notes under some circumstances, I would have to surrender the notes to the courts. But outside of that, everything that's said in this room stays in this room just between the two of us. Is that kind of clear?
Yes.
Okay. So before we get started, I would like to just hear a little bit about what's been going on with you and kind of what prompted you to come to counseling, what got you through the door, and then after we review that a little bit, we can get into some things specifically. So if you just want to tell me what's been going on with you, that would help us get started.
All right. Well, I got a couple big things all happening kind of simultaneously in my life, and I figured, I've never been in counseling before, so if I was ever gonna be in counseling, that now would be the time. So those things would be. I'll kind of list them off. I'll give you a quick synopsis.
Sure.
Earlier this year, this is probably the biggest thing. Earlier this year, I found out that I am the father to an 8-year-old girl. Her name's Laura. And up until this point, I did not know that I did in fact have a daughter. I already have a 2-year-old son who is, very relevant in my life, and I've raised him since birth, and it was a planned pregnancy and everything. But the 8-year-old, with me being currently 25, this is something that happened. A girl that I got pregnant back when I was 16. Now, at the time, she was not so monogamous, and had actually told me once she got pregnant that she had gotten a paternity test and that the child was in fact not mine, and she moved to a different state. So at that same time, I'm in recovery. I'm in recovery now, but at the time, I was forming a pretty serious drug habit. So even if I did know that she was my child at the time, it would have made for probably a pretty bad situation. So she moved to another state. I never really thought anything of it until recently. At the beginning of the year, I was contacted by her grandfather, who has sole custody because her mother is not in the picture and shares in my affliction to drugs. So he contacted me to get a paternity test after doing some research and after a lot of inquiries from Laura, my daughter, to figure out who her father is. And I said, yeah, of course, I will, go ahead and take a paternity test. Not to mention, if they really wanted to force a paternity test through the courts, they could, and I didn't want to go that route, and B, I also wanted to know if she was in fact my biological daughter. So we went through with that. The results came back that she's a 98% match. So then started this, okay, well, how do you go about forming a relationship with an 8-year-old? It just so happens that she lives about an hour north of me, so to be able to do that would not be, to make the time in order to do that would not be too difficult. But with this whole process, adds a lot of stressors. It really puts a strain on my availability, not to mention financial aspects. So there's that. She's a pretty difficult child. I've come to find out she's very challenging. When she's told no, she tends to retaliate in various ways. And I think that is mostly due to the way that she was raised, which was by her grandfather from when she was 6 months old.
Mm-hmm.
He seems that he's done the best that he was able to do, and the only parenting style that he knows seems to be a lot of financial. He makes up for a lot of things financially, so she's never really wanted for anything financially or materialistically, and that is stuff that I currently can't offer her, and it seems that she's not used to being told no. So we've run into a few problems with that, and she also seems quite jealous of my son. Him being 2 years old, he requires a significant amount of attention, and she sees that attention or the amount of attention that he gets, and she kind of acts out. It seems that she will take any sort of attention, whether it positive or negative, but she just wants attention nonetheless, which I can understand, but we think that when she's not being directly supervised, or if she's alone in a room with my 2-year-old, that she may be doing things like pinching him, or I've actually, when I'm supervising them, seen her take stuff from him. Usually when it seems that he's expressing joy or happiness towards a specific toy, she likes to come in and take that and then have her own fun with it, and a lot of redirecting has to take place, and I would classify that as negative attention, and so there's that situation. The mother is not involved, so I would be the only relevant parent for her, and I'm kind of trying my best, but at the same time, I don't want to expose my son to any sort of negativity that could come from her. So it's an interesting process.
Yeah, it sounds interesting. So let me just make sure I'm hearing you right. So it sounds like you we're in a relationship, had a planned pregnancy, now have a son, and just a few months ago you found out that you actually had a daughter, kind of from a time period in your past when it sounds like you were struggling with an addiction, a substance addiction. And the last few months, it sounds like, has been you struggling with kind of finding that chemistry or finding a healthy dynamic with your daughter.
Exactly.
So there's some behavioral problems there. There's a little bit of rivalry or resentment or envy. It sounds like to me, correct me if I'm wrong, between your daughter and your son. Does that sound right?
Yeah, that's accurate.
Okay. So and what I also heard you say is that this difficulty between you and your daughter is creating anxiety for you.
Yes, it's currently a huge stressor.
Okay.
And definitely creating a lot of anxiety.
Okay. So I'm interested in talking a little bit about the anxiety. Is the anxiety, first and foremost, something that you're interested in working on in counseling? Is that a goal of yours to kind of alleviate your anxiety that's brought on by the difficulties that you're having with your daughter?
Yes, of course.
Okay. I think that's a good place to start, so we're not spending time on something that you actually don't want to improve. So speaking of the anxiety, can you try to help me understand exactly how it presents itself in any given day? What either with your daughter or when you're not with your daughter, kind of how does that anxiety affect you, and what areas of your life do you notice it kind of taking a negative toll on?
Well, I'm not sure of the exact description of anxiety. I have a lot of oral fixations which seem to be heightened and kind of seem like my own remedy to help with anxiety.
What are some of those?
So nicotine consumption, nail biting. I grind my teeth in my sleep, which I've noticed happens a lot more when I am anxious or go to bed anxious. So those would probably be the top three.
Mm-hmm.
And then you said, how does it present itself?
Like, what I meant by my question is, if you're in school or if you have a job or if you have other responsibilities or maybe even hobbies that you partake in regularly, does the anxiety ever kind of affect you while you're, participating in those? Does it take you away from your work? Does it distract you or discourage you from maybe exercising or things that you would do? Does it ever feel like it's kind of taking you out of the moment and having a negative impact on you in that way?
Yeah, I will get kind of lost in thought, maybe at work or whatever I'm doing regarding the situation, and get pretty anxious thinking about her next visit, because it's planned that she comes every 3 weeks currently. So leading up to that third week, I definitely get pretty anxious if she reaches out sometimes just to talk on the phone or something like that. I might actually get a little when I see the number pop up that she's calling from, I'll get anxious and sometimes won't even answer. So that would definitely be a negative quality to it, because I don't know, I get so anxious that I can't bring myself to talk on the phone.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that's actually good to know. That is sounds like not an uncommon way of kind of dealing with this, because this seems to be an anxiety producing thing. And maybe something that I didn't say earlier is that this certainly is a difficult situation, and I feel for you. It's nothing that I've personally gone through in my life, but I can definitely understand how getting the news of having a daughter who is 8 years old, and then being in a position to now start building a relationship with her after not knowing her for so long, or even knowing of her, for so long. I understand that could be extremely difficult for you, and I feel for you on that. And it sounds like you're handling it in a way that involves integrity and responsibility and commitment, which I definitely commend you for. As far as the anxiety that's produced by the relationship or maybe lack thereof, sounds like a very realistic goal that we can work on in therapy, and perhaps give you some homework assignments or give you some mindfulness activities to practice when you do feel that anxiety creeping in, and you find yourself maybe smoking more or biting your nails or maybe avoiding phone calls. If that's something that you'd like to work on, behavioral changes like that, I definitely think that's a realistic goal for us to work on in here.
Yeah, that sounds good to me, because I would love to handle this in a more positive way, as opposed to just kind of dodging phone calls or looking to nicotine or other things to kind of alleviate that anxiety.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like we're looking for more adaptive coping skills rather than, maladaptive or even unhealthy in some ways.
Right.
Okay. Now, a question that I think is appropriate is, can you think of a time in your life in the past where you felt stress and anxiety, maybe external stressors or just expectations of yourself or expectations of others, kind of weighing on you? And if so, is there ever a time where you can remember yourself persevering through that and coping with the anxiety in either, a healthy way or a constructive way, and then kind of getting to the other side?
Well, aside from the daughter situation, because that original news was pretty interesting to try and handle. There was the relationship with my son's mother came kind of to a abrupt end. Now I say abrupt as far as the actual ending, but hindsight, it was definitely leading up to that point. And we had a little family. We had the apartment, the kid, the jobs, the cars, and that kind of all fell apart. And while I was going through that, I had some pretty dark times, and I had no choice but to persevere through those. So.
Okay. So, is there any skills or techniques that you can think back on during that time that you said was dark and it was strenuous between you and your ex-girlfriend? Can you think of anything that you did specifically that would kind of turn your mood around or allow you to almost compartmentalize or push it aside, if you will, momentarily, so you can fulfill your responsibilities, say at work or your fatherly duties or anything like that?
Yeah, I would say that I'm pretty well versed in compartmentalizing. When it seems that when there is negative situations that occur, that I almost show or express little to no emotion towards it. Like, it was a pretty sad scenario to go through this breakup, and I didn't shed a tear, nor did I express too much sadness towards the ending of the relationship. I find that physical activity, be it the gym or some sort of physical exertion, usually helps me through any negative feelings. So I took to the gym a lot. Talking to people close to me was a big thing. Kind of just venting about the situation. I found that those things helped.
Okay. So it sounds like during this previous time where you were feeling a lot of stress and there was a lot of turmoil in your relationship, and it almost sounds like the time before a pretty big transition, which was the split and the end of a relationship and kind of a new chapter. Sounds like exercise and reaching out and kind of utilizing close relationships, discussing it with people, those were two techniques that you found worked with you.
Yes, for sure.
Okay. What do you think about applying those skills to the situation now? Have you tried to do that, or do you think that this situation is too different, or have you been experiencing different results? Tell me a little bit about that.
No, I've definitely been applying those tactics to the current daughter situation. It's just that it's different in the sense that it's an ongoing thing, as opposed to the breakup being kind of like a Band-Aid. And my feelings over that dwindled over time, as opposed to the daughter situation where it's ongoing, and I'm kind of not only expected but want to build this relationship, I'm just running into a lot of obstacles, and you know, there's expectation of how that I kind of put on myself on how to handle the situation, and the breakup was just kind of, you know, a sad time, but it came and then it went.
Mm-hmm.
This situation now is ongoing and
Right.
seems as though it will be, you know, for however long.
Right. Yeah, it sounds like the breakup had a beginning and an end, as opposed to the relationship with your daughter, which is a more long-term situation. And it sounds like it's something that you want to be long-term, but from what I'm hearing, correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like you hope that it will get better and get easier both on her and you individually.
Yes, it's just how I deal with the negative aspects to it in the meantime.
Right. So the relationships that you were speaking about, the people that you reach out to and vent to, like you said, have those people been helpful recently with the situation with your daughter? Have you been able to reach out to them and get, you know, good support from them?
Yes, and my support sort of network is also beneficial in the fact that they are a lot of times also in recovery.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like it's like two birds with one stone, because me being in recovery, a lot of times with negative situations, especially if they're pretty big situations, you know, my first thought may be to, you know, use substances or something like that. So if I'm talking to someone that's also in recovery, they're also able to help me out with the substance abuse side, and not only the negative aspects to the situation at hand. So they've definitely been helpful. A lot of, I would not minimizing the situation, but saying how much worse it could be. And a lot of them have commended me on, you know, kind of taking the reins on this situation, and it definitely helps me to hear that from men that I know and respect.
Mm-hmm.
That they like how I'm handling the situation. It makes me feel as though I'm handling it the correct way.
Okay. How do you feel like you're handling it? Sounds like you get pretty positive feedback from the people around you, and they give you credit for handling it in a way that, you know, demands respect and applause, if you will. But if you were to assess how you've handled this situation thus far, you know, what kind of grade would you give yourself hypothetically?
I would give myself a B+.
Okay.
I'm not too proud of the not answering of the phone calls, so I could definitely do better with that. But I am proud and happy that I've dealt. I don't want to say so much dealt with the situation, because
Right.
You know, this is my child, and I'm trying to build a relationship with her. But this in the past would be a situation that I would in fact run from, as opposed to face it head on. So that's why I would give myself, you know, hypothetically a decent grade, just knowing my past behaviors.
Right. So it sounds like a few years back, when you weren't, you know, in recovery, and from what I know about recovery, aligning your behavior with the principles of the program, which involves honesty and, you know, responsibility and integrity, things like that. You would have ran from it in the past, but you're facing it head on today, which it sounds like you give yourself credit for. You get credit from those around you, but there are a few areas in which you feel you could improve.
Right, and those would be things that I would like to work on with you.
Right. And we talked about that kind of as an all-encompassing term, being anxiety and stress.
Right.
So if the anxiety and the stress were to be alleviated, or hypothetically speaking, eliminated, a little bit of stress and anxiety sometimes I think is healthy. But for the most part, if the stress and the anxiety went away, describe what you think the relationship would be like or could be like with your daughter.
Well, I think it would be very positive. I think that when I'm with her, I think before I'm with her, I make it out to be negative, and I get anxious and think she's going to do this or she's going to do that, she's going to challenge me. Whereas once I'm actually with her, it's not so bad as I make it out to be beforehand. So if I could do away with those feelings that I have prior to actually seeing her, then I think that I would be more engaging, maybe when there is a little bit of distance between us, and could be, more thoughtful, like calling her instead of her calling me. It's just kind of like the stress and anxiety get in the way of me, bonding with her to the fullest.
Mm-hmm. And from what I'm hearing, it sounds like a lot of that is done in your own mind. You kind of place almost negative expectations on what the interaction is going to be like, and that almost sets the stage for when you two are actually together in person. Does that sound accurate?
Right.
Okay. What do you think you could do to change your approach or change your expectations of what the interaction is going to be like? Do you think that you would benefit from telling yourself beforehand that this is going to be good and she's going to be good and we're going to get along and things are going to be positive? Have you ever played that scenario out in your mind in other situations where you say this is going to be good and you almost speak it into existence?
Right. That's not a bad idea. If I've thought about it, just haven't consciously put in the effort to do so thus far. But I have thought if I could put more of a positive spin on the actual situation, that it might reflect in my behaviors, when I do see her, when I'm not with her. It's just I've kind of been stuck in this negative mentality just because of the few not so great times that I've had with her.
Right. And they do sound not so fun, and I'm sure that I or anybody else would be pretty stressed out by those types of interactions too. So the last question I'll ask you is this: what do you think has prevented you thus far from really focusing on that idea of the positive thinking of this is going to be good, she's going to be well behaved, we're going to get along, this is a big step in us developing a positive relationship with each other? What do you think is preventing you from doing that?
Honestly, if I really look at it, a lot of it would be selfish thinking, whereas the more that I form this relationship with her, the less availability I'll have, and the more it really comes down to I want to do what I want to do, and bringing another child fully into the fold will really do away with most of the free time that I have left, just having one child and working full time. So I know it's going to cut into that, and financially, I don't think that I could bring her on fully just yet. So I think that keeping a little bit of distance in the relationship, and now I'm just speaking to what I believe my subconscious is doing, because none of this is too conscious unless I gotta really think about it, but keeping a little bit of distance kind of keeps that at bay for a little bit, but it's kind of just pushing off the inevitable. So I would like to approach the situation differently. I just have to really be conscious as to how I'm behaving towards the situation.
Right. And not only behaving, but it sounds like thinking to me from what you said. A lot takes place in your mind, and so it definitely sounds like a good goal for counseling is going to be changing that thinking.
Yes.
Changing the thinking from what it is now to what it could be, which is more positive, more optimistic, and I definitely believe that that's a goal that we can work towards in here.
Okay, good.